Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello described what he says is the human cost of the U.S. military operation, speaking on his weekly television program, Con el Mazo Dando, Going at It with the Club. Cabello says at least 100 people were killed, but the toll has not been independently verified. Cabello also claimed a similar number were injured, without independent confirmation. Venezuela was the victim of a barbaric, treacherous attack, where so far, and I say so far, there are 100 dead and another similar number of injured, Cabello declared. He emphasized the phrase, so far, indicating the death toll could rise as more information becomes available. A terrible attack against our country. That is true. That is the truth. No one will cover it up. This is among the most detailed casualty claims from a senior Venezuelan official since the January 3rd operation. The numbers are significant, if accurate. However, the figures cannot be independently verified at this time. International observers have not had access to the affected areas. The United States has not released casualty figures for the Venezuelan side. This creates a situation where competing narratives dominate, with no neutral arbiter to confirm the truth. Cabello's program is a weekly fixture on Venezuelan state television. The minister is one of the most powerful figures in Venezuela's ruling Socialist Party. His statements carry weight both domestically and internationally. By claiming 100 dead, Cabello is attempting to frame the U.S. operation as a massacre, not a surgical strike. Cabello provided details about who he says died in the operation. The victims were not only military personnel, according to his account. People who had nothing to do with the conflict died, Cabello stated. Civilians, women who were in their homes, people who were in their houses, were struck by the impact of the extremely powerful bombs launched against our country. This accusation is significant. If accurate, it would mean the U.S. operation caused substantial civilian casualties. This would raise serious questions under international humanitarian law. The laws of armed conflict require distinction between military and civilian targets. Proportionality requires that civilian harm not be excessive relative to military advantage. Cabello's claims, if true, would suggest violations of these principles. He paid tribute to what he called fallen martyrs and heroes. Tribute to the fallen martyrs and heroes, comrades of the armed forces. Cuban brothers who are here in Venezuela, police personnel, comrades who were sleeping in their homes and suddenly shrapnel reached them, and they were killed. The minister dedicated his program to these victims. The mention of Cuban personnel is significant. Past reporting and analysts say Cuba has long had advisors and security-linked personnel in Venezuela. And Cuban officials say their personnel were among those killed during the operation. Cuban officials say 32 of their military and intelligence personnel were killed. This represents a significant loss for Havana. It is the largest number of Cuban military deaths in a foreign operation in decades. Analysts say Cuban personnel have provided training and security support in Venezuela, though details vary by report. Some accounts describe Cuban advisors embedded with Venezuelan military units. Others describe intelligence personnel working on internal security. The exact nature and scope of Cuban involvement remains unclear. But the deaths of 32 personnel confirm a substantial presence. The deaths of Cuban personnel will likely strain US-Cuba relations further. Relations were already tense following years of sanctions and diplomatic isolation. This incident adds a new dimension: direct Cuban casualties from US military action. It also raises questions about the scope of the US operation. Were Cuban personnel specifically targeted, or were they hit during strikes against Venezuelan military installations? These questions remain unanswered. Venezuela's army says at least 23 soldiers were killed in the operation. This figure comes from official Venezuelan military sources. It represents losses across multiple units and locations. The operation reportedly struck military installations in Caracas and surrounding states. Fort Tiuna, the main military complex in Caracas, was reportedly among the targets. This is where Maduro's compound was located. The 23 confirmed military deaths represent a significant toll for Venezuela's armed forces. Combined, officials in Venezuela and Cuba put the reported military-linked deaths at least 55. This includes 23 Venezuelan soldiers and 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel. Cabello's figure of 100 total deaths suggests significant civilian casualties as well. That gap could suggest civilian deaths, but any breakdown is still unverified. The U.S. has not released casualty figures for the Venezuelan side. International observers have not had access to the affected areas. The true human cost of the operation remains disputed. Cabello says President Maduro was wounded during the operation. Brother Nicholas, with a wound to one leg, fortunately, is improving, he stated. This appears to be the clearest public acknowledgement yet from a senior Venezuelan official about Maduro's injury. Previous reports had suggested Maduro was captured but provided limited details about his condition. Cabello's statement confirms that Maduro sustained physical injuries. A photo shared publicly by U.S. officials showed Maduro blindfolded aboard the USS Iwo Jima. He was wearing gray Nike sweatpants and a jacket. He appeared to be in custody, but ambulatory. The photo did not show obvious signs of injury, but clothing could have concealed bandages or wounds. It's unclear when he was injured. It could have happened during the assault or during the transfer. The initial breach of his compound at Fort Tiuna reportedly involved explosives and gunfire. Cabello's statement indicates Maduro is receiving medical care, though he did not specify where or from whom. First Lady Cilia Flores was also injured, according to Cabello. At that moment, Cilia was wounded in the head and suffered a blow to the body, Cabello stated. This confirms that both Maduro and his wife sustained injuries during the capture. Photos shared by U.S. officials showed Flores wearing an olive green hoodie with her head bandaged. The bandage appears consistent with Cabello's account of a head injury. Head injuries can range from minor cuts to serious trauma. The nature and severity of her injuries remain unclear. Cabello did not provide details about her current condition. U.S. authorities say Maduro and Flores were flown to the United States after the operation. U.S. court and detention records reported by major outlets place them at MDC Brooklyn. It's a high-profile federal jail that has held multiple well-known defendants in recent years. Both are scheduled to face federal charges in Manhattan. Cabello framed Maduro's detention in specific terms. The whole world today knows that Nicolas Maduro is a prisoner of war, he declared. This characterization is legally significant. Prisoners of war have specific protections under the Geneva Conventions. These protections include humane treatment, access to communication, and eventual repatriation. POWs are not criminal defendants. They are combatants captured during armed conflict. By calling Maduro a prisoner of war, Cabello implies that Venezuela and the United States are in a state of armed conflict. He also implies that Maduro should receive protections accorded to captured combatants, not criminal defendants. The United States has not recognized this framing. Washington treats Maduro as a criminal defendant facing drug trafficking charges, not as a prisoner of war. The distinction matters enormously. Criminal defendants face prosecution, potential conviction, and imprisonment. Prisoners of war face detention until the end of hostilities, then release. The whole world knows that the United States' North American imperialism violated all the rules of international coexistence, Cabello continued. It is even today violating all the rules of the United States government's own system, and the rejection there is enormous. Cabello accused the United States of targeting civilian infrastructure. Why attack a place where medicines are stored for people who have insulin problems and require insulin? Why attack a center like that? What is the morbid intent? The evil of attacking a center of that type? This is a serious accusation. Medical facilities are protected under international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions prohibit attacks on hospitals, clinics, and medical storage facilities. If a protected medical site was deliberately targeted, legal experts say that could amount to a war crime. The key word is deliberately. International law distinguishes between intentional attacks on protected sites and incidental damage. U.S. officials have publicly described their targets as military-linked, but have not addressed Cabello's specific claim in detail. The Pentagon has stated that the operation targeted military installations and Maduro's compound. Whether strikes hit medical facilities, intentionally or accidentally, remains disputed. Cabello issued a direct demand to the United States. We say it here, and we demand that they return them to us alive. Alive. The repetition of alive is significant. It implies concern about Maduro and Flores' safety in U.S. custody. This demand has been echoed by other Venezuelan officials. It has also been supported by Russia and China. Returning Maduro appears unlikely given the U.S. criminal case and public statements from Washington. He faces federal drug trafficking charges carrying potential life imprisonment. Trump has publicly defended the operation and framed the case as a major priority. But Venezuela continues to make the demand, framing Maduro's detention as illegitimate kidnapping rather than lawful arrest. The framing matters for international opinion. Kidnapping implies illegality and victimhood. Arrest implies law enforcement and criminality. Venezuela insists on the former. The United States insists on the latter. Cabello described the emotional impact on Venezuelan citizens. And here, in our country, our people. The first days, of course, shocked and emotionally affected. And one could say, in the best use of that term, with great fear. With great fear because of the disproportion of the attacks against our country. That cannot be applauded by anyone. He rejected claims that Venezuelans were celebrating Maduro's capture. And anyone who tells you in the United States that here in Venezuela people are celebrating what they did is lying to you. They are lying to you. Here, the people take to the streets to demand that Nicolas and Cilia be returned to us. The people take to the streets to demand respect for the sovereignty and independence of our country. This narrative contests reports of celebrations in some Venezuelan neighborhoods following Maduro's capture. The reality on the ground is likely mixed, with some Venezuelans mourning and others celebrating. Venezuela is a deeply divided country. Millions fled during Maduro's presidency. Millions more remained, some as supporters, others as opponents without means to leave. Cabello's portrayal represents the government's preferred narrative. Cabello praised Maduro's conduct since his capture. Nicolas Maduro has been kidnapped, and is in the condition of a prisoner of war in a cell in New York. The dignity with which he attended his arraignment hearing. The firm answers, the smile always in adversity, the messages he has sent us, which we have interpreted. This refers to Maduro's court appearance in Manhattan. He pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking charges. Photos showed him in shackles but appearing composed. Cabello's description emphasizes Maduro's resilience, portraying him as unbowed despite his circumstances. This messaging is intended for domestic Venezuelan consumption. It frames Maduro as a heroic figure resisting what Venezuela calls imperial aggression. The messages he has sent us, which we have interpreted, suggests communication between Maduro and the Venezuelan government. Whether through lawyers, coded statements, or other means is unclear. While Cabello spoke on Wednesday, acting President Delcy Rodríguez had already issued multiple statements. Her messaging evolved dramatically over the first days after the raid. On Saturday, January 4th, the day after Maduro's capture, Rodríguez appeared before the National Defense Council. Her tone was defiant. The government of the United States launched an unprecedented military aggression against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, she declared. This constitutes a terrible stain on the development of bilateral relations. In this military operation, President Nicolas Maduro and the First Lady, the first combatant Cilia Flores, were captured. She called it an illegal and illegitimate kidnapping. The word kidnapping was deliberate. It frames the capture as criminal rather than legal. It denies any legitimacy to U.S. actions. Rodríguez convened Venezuela's highest security body. We have convened this National Defense Council, in which the public powers of the Venezuelan state are participating. She listed the attendees: the President of the Legislative Power, the President of the Judicial Power, the Attorney General, the Minister of Defense, the head of the Strategic Operational Command. All political factors of national power in Venezuela are united, she declared. This show of unity was important. It signaled that Maduro's capture had not fractured the government. It demonstrated that institutions remained functional. From that council, she issued demands. From this body, we demand the immediate release of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. The only president of Venezuela is President Nicolas Maduro. She emphasized, there is only one president in this country, and his name is Nicolas Maduro Moros. Rodríguez accused the United States of pursuing regime change. We had already warned that an aggression was underway under false excuses, and that the masks had fallen, revealing only one objective: regime change in Venezuela. A regime change that would also allow for the seizure of our energy resources, our mineral resources, and our natural resources. That is the true objective, and the world and the international community must know that this is the case. This narrative frames the U.S. operation as resource seizure disguised as counter-narcotics. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. Rodríguez argues Washington's true goal is controlling these resources, not fighting drug trafficking. This argument resonates with many in the global South. U.S. interventions in resource-rich countries have historically raised such suspicions. Rodríguez declared national mobilization on Saturday. There is a people that has activated itself in response to a call that the President of the Republic had already made. She quoted Maduro's prior warning. If something were to happen to President Nicolas Maduro, people to the streets will be activated. The core of militants at their workplaces, activated. The National Bolivarian Armed Forces, activated and deployed throughout the national territory. Citizen security agencies, activated. All the national power of Venezuela, activated. She claimed international support. The international community has joined in and raised its voices of support for Venezuela from China, Russia, Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. This reflects Venezuela's diplomatic strategy. Appeal to the global South. Frame the conflict as North versus South. Position Venezuela as defender of sovereignty against imperialism. Then, something remarkable happened. Just 24 hours later, Rodríguez's tone transformed completely. On Sunday evening, she posted a message to social media with dramatically different language. Venezuela reaffirms its vocation for peace and peaceful coexistence. Our country aspires to live without external threats in an environment of respect and international cooperation. Gone was the language of resistance. Gone was the demand for Maduro's immediate release. Gone was the accusation of kidnapping. In its place, an olive branch. We consider it a priority to advance toward a balanced and respectful international relationship between the United States and Venezuela, and between Venezuela and the countries of the region. What caused this dramatic shift? Several factors may have contributed. Trump had issued explicit threats against Rodríguez personally. The U.S. military remained positioned for potential follow-up action. Venezuela's economic situation was desperate. Oil tanker seizures were choking revenue. Perhaps pragmatism overcame defiance. Most significantly, Rodríguez signed the message with a new title, Acting President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. On Saturday, she had declared, "There is only one president in this country, and his name is Nicolas Maduro Moros." On Sunday, she signed as acting president herself. This is a significant shift in both substance and symbolism. It suggests acceptance, at least functionally, that Maduro cannot currently exercise presidential powers. The constitutional transfer of authority appears to be taking place. Venezuela's constitution provides for succession in cases of presidential absence. Rodríguez, as executive vice president, would assume acting authority. By signing as acting president, she formally acknowledged this transition. Whether this is temporary or permanent remains unclear. The word acting implies temporariness. It preserves the fiction that Maduro remains president, but it acknowledges the practical reality of his detention. Rodríguez addressed President Trump directly. We extend an invitation to the government of the United States to work together on a cooperation agenda oriented toward shared development within the framework of international legality. This is diplomatic language for negotiation. It signals willingness to discuss terms. Then, the direct appeal. President Donald Trump, attention. Our peoples and our region deserve peace and dialogue, not war. That has always been the preaching of President Nicolas Maduro, and it is that of all Venezuela at this moment. By invoking Maduro while seeking cooperation, Rodríguez threads a difficult needle. She maintains loyalty to her detained leader. She simultaneously signals flexibility to Washington. She concluded with a personal statement. This is the Venezuela I believe in, the one to which I have dedicated my life. My dream is that Venezuela be a great power where all Venezuelans of goodwill can come together. Venezuela has the right to peace, to development, to its sovereignty, and to the future. The contrast between Cabello and Rodríguez is striking. Cabello's message is defiant. He calls Maduro a prisoner of war. He demands his return alive. He accuses the U.S. of targeting civilians and medical facilities. He says Venezuelans are shocked and afraid, but united in demanding sovereignty. Rodríguez's message, at least her Sunday message, is conciliatory. She invites cooperation, she appeals for peace. She signs as acting president rather than demanding Maduro's immediate return. These may represent different strategies within the Venezuelan government. Good cop, bad cop. Defiance for domestic consumption, diplomacy for external engagement, or they may represent a genuine division between hardliners like Cabello and pragmatists seeking accommodation with Washington. Venezuela has received international support. Russia called the operation an act of armed aggression against Venezuela and demanded Maduro's release. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called Rodríguez to express solidarity. Russia has significant interests in Venezuela. Russian companies have invested in Venezuelan oil production. The relationship is strategic. China said it was deeply shocked and strongly condemns the action. China's foreign ministry demanded Maduro's immediate release and warned against any country acting as world policeman. China is Venezuela's largest creditor. Billions in Chinese loans are secured by oil shipments. Maduro's removal threatens Chinese economic interests. Cuba, which says it lost 32 personnel, has condemned the operation as state terrorism. Cuba's response is the most personal. Cuban personnel died. This transforms the conflict from geopolitics to human loss. These allies provide diplomatic support, but cannot reverse Maduro's capture. Any binding UN Security Council action would likely face a US veto, limiting enforcement. Venezuela's allies can condemn, but they cannot compel Washington to release Maduro. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting on Monday. Venezuela's ambassador Samuel Moncada delivered a blistering condemnation. He called the US operation an illegitimate armed attack, including bombings, loss of civilian and military lives, destruction of essential infrastructure, and the kidnapping of the constitutional president. He cited violations of the UN Charter, Geneva Conventions, and international human rights law. He demanded Maduro's immediate release. He demanded condemnation of the use of force. He demanded reaffirmation of the principle against acquiring territory or resources by force. The United States representative defended the operation. She framed it as counter-narcotics enforcement. She cited Maduro's indictment on drug trafficking charges. Any binding UN Security Council action would likely face a US veto, limiting enforcement. The debate established positions, but changed nothing on the ground. On Monday afternoon, Maduro appeared in Manhattan federal court. He was arraigned before Judge Alvin Hellerstein. He pleaded not guilty to 4 counts: narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. The indictment alleges Maduro partnered with Colombian drug traffickers. It claims he facilitated the transport of thousands of tons of cocaine. Prosecutors allege this made Maduro not just a politician, but a drug kingpin. If convicted, he faces life imprisonment. The case will be complex. It involves classified intelligence. It involves foreign evidence. It involves unprecedented legal questions about head of state immunity. Trump has acknowledged the trial will be lengthy. "We're just going to go through a slog of a trial," he said. The case is infallible. Trump has issued warnings to Venezuela's acting president. He stated that if Rodríguez doesn't cooperate, she is going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. This threat is explicit. It promises personal consequences for Rodríguez. It implies potential capture similar to Maduro's. It hangs over all Venezuelan negotiations. Rodríguez's shift from defiance to cooperation may reflect this pressure. She faces the prospect of the same fate as Maduro if Washington decides to escalate further. Secretary of State Rubio offered a different framing. He stated, "We are at war against drug trafficking organizations. It's not a war against Venezuela." This distinguishes between the government and criminal elements. But the distinction may feel academic to Venezuelan officials facing potential capture. Venezuela now faces a fundamental choice. Cabello represents the defiant path: resist, demand Maduro's return, frame him as a prisoner of war, mobilize the population, rely on Russian and Chinese support. Rodríguez's Sunday message suggests another path: cooperate, seek dialogue, accept the new reality, negotiate the best possible terms with Washington. These paths may not be mutually exclusive. Venezuela may pursue both simultaneously: defiance for domestic consumption, dialogue for survival. But eventually, a choice will have to be made. The Trump administration has made clear it expects cooperation or escalation. Venezuela is in crisis. According to Interior Minister Cabello, 100 people are dead, though this figure has not been independently verified. The president is in a Brooklyn jail cell. The First Lady is injured and detained. 32 Cuban personnel are dead. 23 Venezuelan soldiers are dead. An unknown number of civilians may have been killed. The government operates under threat of further US military action. Oil tankers are being seized on the high seas. Revenue streams are being choked. The international community is divided. Russia and China demand Maduro's release. Cuba mourns its dead. But Western nations remain largely silent. Acting President Rodríguez is walking a tightrope. She must satisfy hardliners like Cabello, who demand defiance. She must satisfy Washington, which demands cooperation. She must maintain order in a country Cabello describes as shocked and emotionally affected by the US raid. And she must do all this while signing as acting president, a title that acknowledges her leader is gone. The coming weeks will determine Venezuela's trajectory. Will there be further US military action? Will negotiations produce an accommodation? Will Venezuela's government collapse or adapt? Will Maduro's trial proceed, or will unexpected developments intervene? These questions have no clear answers. What is clear? The US military operation of January 3rd has fundamentally changed Venezuela's reality. Maduro is in custody. His government survives, but under pressure it has never faced before. Cabello claims 100 are dead and demands the president's return. Rodríguez extends an olive branch while signing as acting president. These contrasting messages reveal a government searching for a path forward. The world watches as Venezuela navigates its most serious crisis in decades. The outcome will shape the country's future and the precedent for US power in the Western Hemisphere.